The house was breathing its last. I had come to this conclusion on a Tuesday morning, when a fat drop of gray water landed squarely on my nose as I slept. It was a slow, melancholy drip, a tear shed by the ceiling for a life lived too long in quiet neglect. My grandmother's house. Now my house. For 10 years it had been my fortress of solitude, and for 10 years I had been its warden, dutifully watching it crumble around me. The leak was not a surprise, merely the final, undeniable symptom of a decay that had set in long before I inherited the keys. It was the house's way of telling me I could no longer ignore the silence, the peeling paint, the floorboards that groaned like a dying man. I was 34 years old, lived in a house full of ghosts, and my roof was crying on me. Something had to be done. My neighbor, a bustling woman named Carol with a garden full of aggressively cheerful gnomes, had been telling me this for years. She recommended a man. Cole, she had said, her voice full of the kind of confidence I had never possessed. He fixed our porch last summer. Quiet man. Does good work. Doesn't charge an arm and a leg. Quiet sounded good. Competent sounded better. I was tired of things breaking. So I called him. His voice on the phone was exactly as Carol had described him through her actions. Low, calm, unhurried. It was a voice that didn't waste words. We set a time for him to come by and look at the damage. The entire interaction took less than 2 minutes, and when I hung up, the silence of the house felt even more profound. I spent the next day tidying up, a frantic, useless endeavor. I scrubbed floors that would soon be covered in dust and wiped down counters he would never see. It was the nervous energy of someone preparing for an invasion, even a welcome one. I was letting a stranger into my carefully curated world of dusty books and quiet routine, and the thought was both terrifying and thrilling. He arrived precisely at 9 o'clock the next morning. His truck was old but clean, a dark blue Ford that looked like it had been working hard its entire life. When he stepped out, he was not what I had expected. I had pictured someone older, grizzled, perhaps with a gut straining against a flannel shirt. Cole was younger than me, maybe by a few years. He was tall and lean, with the kind of solid build that comes from physical labor, not a gym. He wore a simple gray t-shirt that fit well across his shoulders and worn jeans that had faded to a soft blue over his thighs. His hair was dark and cut short, and he had a few days of stubble on his jaw that gave his face a rough, handsome edge. But it was his eyes that held me. They were a deep, steady brown, and they took everything in with a quiet, unnerving intensity. He didn't smile, not at first. He just watched me as he walked up the cracked flagstone path. Julian, he asked. His voice was the same as on the phone. A low rumble. I nodded, my own voice caught somewhere in my throat. Yeah. Hi. Cole. He gave a short, single nod. Let's see the roof. There was no small talk. No pleasantries about the weather or the neighborhood. He was here to work. I appreciated the directness, even as it made me feel clumsy and awkward. I led him through the house, acutely aware of every creak of the floorboards, every mote of dust dancing in the morning light. I felt like I was on display as much as the house was. He followed me, his footsteps solid and sure behind my own hesitant ones. His presence filled the space, a tangible energy that the old house hadn't felt in years. He smelled of sawdust and fresh air, a clean, earthy scent that clung to him like a second skin. I showed him the stain on my bedroom ceiling, the sagging plaster in the hallway. He just listened, his gaze moving over every flaw with a professional, unreadable expression. He ran a hand over a water-damaged wall, his fingers calloused and sure. I found myself watching his hands. They were large, capable, with clean, short nails and a network of faint white scars across the knuckles. They were hands that knew how to fix things. I wondered, for a fleeting, ridiculous moment, if they could fix more than just a leaky roof. He went up into the attic, and I waited below, listening to the muffled sounds of his movements above me. When he came back down, his face was smudged with dirt, but his expression was unchanged. It's bad, he said, his tone matter of fact. The flashing around the chimney is gone. Some rot in the support beams. It's not just a patch job. You need a new roof. I had expected as much. I felt a familiar wave of despair wash over me. The cost, the disruption. He must have seen it on my face. For the first time, a flicker of something other than professional assessment crossed his features. I can do it, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. It'll take a couple of weeks, but it'll be solid when I'm done. It'll last you another 30 years, 30 years. It sounded like an eternity. I was having trouble planning for next week. I looked at him, at his steady gaze, and I felt a sliver of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Okay, I said, the word coming out as a breath. Okay, when can you start? He gave me a quote that was fair, and we agreed he would start the following Monday. He left as quietly as he had arrived, his old truck rumbling down the street, leaving me alone again in the silence. But this time, the silence felt different. It was charged with anticipation. The invasion was coming. And for the first time in a very long time, I was looking forward to it. The first week was a symphony of destruction and creation. I worked from home, a freelance graphic designer, so I was a captive audience to the entire process. The rhythmic thud of the hammer, the screech of old shingles being torn away, the low murmur of Cole's voice as he worked. He worked alone, a solitary figure against the blue sky. I found myself watching him from my office window, my own work forgotten. I watched the efficient, powerful way he moved, the muscles in his back and arms flexing under his shirt as he lifted bundles of new shingles. He moved with an unhurried grace, a confidence that was mesmerizing. Each morning, I would make a pot of coffee, and around 10, I would take a mug out to him. The first time, I felt like a teenager with a crush, my heart pounding as I walked across the lawn. Coffee? I asked, holding it out. He stopped what he was doing and turned to me. His face was beaded with sweat, a smudge of tar on his cheek. He looked at the mug, then at me. He took it from my hand, his fingers brushing against mine. It was a fleeting touch, barely there, but it sent a jolt straight through me. A tiny spark of electricity that I felt all the way down to my toes. Thanks, he said, his voice a low gravel. He took a sip, his eyes never leaving mine. It was an intense, probing gaze, and I felt myself flush under the scrutiny. I quickly retreated back into the house, my cheeks burning. This became our ritual. Every day at 10, I would bring him coffee. We never said much. I'd ask how it was going. He'd give a 1 or 2 word answer. Good, moving along. But the silences were filled with something else. A tension that hummed between us. Or maybe I was just imagining it. I was a lonely man in a big, empty house. It was easy to project feelings onto the handsome, quiet stranger who had suddenly entered my life. I started noticing the small things. The way he would pause and watch a bird land on a tree branch. The way he carefully cleaned up his workspace at the end of each day, leaving everything neat and orderly. One afternoon, I saw him crouched down by my grandmother's neglected rose bushes, gently tying a drooping branch to a stake. It was a small, tender gesture that seemed at odds with the powerful man who spent his days tearing my house apart. My internal monologue became a constant stream of Cole-related analysis. Why did he look at me like that over the rim of his coffee mug? Was the lingering brush of his hand an accident? Did he know I was watching him from the window? I felt like I was losing my mind, dissecting every tiny interaction for a hidden meaning that was almost certainly not there. He was a contractor. I was his client. He was being polite. He was probably straight, with a wife and a couple of kids at home. And I was being a creep. But then there were moments that defied my cynical self-assessment. One afternoon, he was working on the gutters, his ladder propped against the side of the house right outside my living room window. I was trying to read, but I couldn't concentrate. I could hear the scrape of the ladder, the soft thud of his boots on the rungs. I finally gave up and just watched him. He was focused on his work, his brow furrowed in concentration. He reached for a tool in his belt, and in doing so, he turned his head and caught me watching him. I froze, my book held limply in my hands. I expected him to look away, to give me an awkward nod. But he didn't. He held my gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. And then, a slow, small smile touched the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a big, friendly smile. It was something quieter, more intimate. A secret shared between the two of us. Then he turned back to his work, leaving me breathless and confused. The roof was finished by the end of the second week. The house felt safer, more secure. The constant threat of rain no longer loomed over me. Cole packed up his tools, and I felt a pang of disappointment. I had gotten used to his presence, the steady rhythm of his work. The house would be quiet again. Too quiet. I wrote him the final check, my hand slightly unsteady. I handed it to him, and again, our fingers brushed. This time, I was sure it wasn't an accident. His fingers lingered on mine for a fraction of a second too long. A deliberate pressure. "The roof looks great," I said, my voice sounding thin. "Thank you. There's still the water damage inside," he said, his voice low. "The plaster in the hallway. The bedroom ceiling. I can fix that for you, if you want." Relief washed over me in a warm wave. It was a reprieve. A stay of execution from the impending silence. "Yes," I said, perhaps too quickly. "Yes, please." He gave me that same slow, secret smile. "I'll start on Monday." The weekend was agonizingly slow. I wandered through the house, touching the walls he would soon repair. I found myself anticipating Monday with an eagerness that was completely foreign to me. I was excited. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. When he returned, the dynamic between us had shifted. The work was inside now, in the close confines of the house. He was no longer a distant figure on the roof, but a constant, physical presence in my personal space. The scent of him, sawdust, and that clean, masculine smell filled the hallways. I would pass him on the stairs, and the space would feel charged, electric. We would be separated by inches, and I would have to fight the urge to reach out and touch him. He started in the upstairs hallway, a long, narrow space that was dark even on the brightest day. The plaster was cracked and peeling, a map of years of neglect. He set up his tools, laying down drop cloths with meticulous care. He worked with the same quiet efficiency as he had on the roof. The sound of his scraper against the old plaster was a soft, rhythmic shush that became the new soundtrack of my days. I tried to stay in my office, to give him space. But I found myself inventing reasons to walk by, to get a glass of water, to check the mail. Each time, I would pause and watch him for a moment. He worked with his t-shirt off sometimes, the summer heat turning the upstairs into an oven. His back was broad and tanned, a landscape of muscle that moved smoothly under his skin. I would watch, my mouth dry, until he would sense my presence in turn, catching me in the act once again. He never seemed bothered by it. He would just look at me with that steady, unreadable gaze, and I would scurry away, my heart pounding. One day, I was bringing him his coffee, and I found him standing in the middle of the hallway, staring at a patch of wall. "Everything okay?" I asked. He turned to me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "This wall isn't straight," he said, running his hand over the surface. "It bows out here." In the middle, he looked at me, a challenge in his eyes. "It's going to bother me," he said. "I should probably reframe it. It'll add a day to the job, but it'll be right." I was struck by his dedication, his need to make things perfect. "Okay," I said. "If you think it's necessary," he nodded, a look of satisfaction on his face. I do. The next day, he tore into the wall. It was loud, messy work. He pulled down the old plaster and laughed, revealing the skeleton of the house. The air was thick with a century's worth of dust. We were in the attic together for a while, checking the main support beams. The space was cramped and hot, the air thick and still. We worked side by side, our shoulders brushing, our hands occasionally bumping as we moved around the tight space. The heat, the dust, the proximity, it was intoxicating. I was acutely aware of his every breath, the scent of his sweat, the solid warmth of his body next to mine. He was explaining something about load-bearing walls, his voice a low rumble in the enclosed space. But I wasn't listening to the words. I was watching his mouth, the way his lips formed the technical terms. I was lost in the moment, in the closeness of him. He stopped talking and looked at me. "You with me, Julian?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. I blinked, my face flushing. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. "Sorry. It's hot up here." He held my gaze for a long moment, and then he reached out and brushed a smudge of dirt from my cheek with his thumb. His touch was feather-light, but it burned a trail on my skin. It was a gesture of such unexpected intimacy that it stole the breath from my lungs. "Yeah," he said softly. "It is." He pulled his hand back, and the moment was broken. But something had changed between us. The unspoken thing that had been simmering beneath the surface was now out in the open, hanging in the hot, dusty air between us. Neither of us acknowledged it, but we both knew it was there. Later that week, after he had reframed the wall and was preparing to put up the new drywall, the moment I would replay in my mind 1,000 times happened. It was late afternoon, and the light was slanting through the hallway window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He was holding a large sheet of drywall against the new studs, trying to get it into position. "Hey, Julian," he called out. Can you give me a hand for a second? I came out of my office, my heart giving a familiar little flutter. Sure. What do you need? Just need to mark a line, he said. I need you to hold the end of this tape measure. Right here, he pointed to a spot on the floor. I crouched down, taking the metal end of the tape. He held the other end, pulling it taut along the floor. He had a pencil tucked behind his ear. Okay, hold that steady, he said. He leaned down to make his mark, and as he did, his hand brushed against mine. It was a common enough accident in such a narrow space. But then his fingers closed over my knuckles. He didn't move. He just held my hand there, his thumb stroking gently over my skin. I looked up at him, my breath hitched in my chest. He was looking down at me, his brown eyes dark and serious. The air crackled with a tension so thick I could taste it. The sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirp of a bird, faded into nothing. There was only the warmth of his hand on mine, the intensity of his gaze. My heart is pounding, a frantic, wild drum against my ribs. I can't breathe. I can't think. All I can feel is the rough texture of his calluses against my skin, the solid weight of his hand holding mine. This is it. This is the moment where the fantasy I've been building in my head either shatters into a million pieces of awkward regret, or it becomes real. He wets his lips, his gaze dropping to my mouth for a split second before returning to my eyes. The movement is so small, so quick, but it's everything. It's a confession. He leans in closer, his voice dropping to a low, husky whisper that seems to vibrate right through me. Hold this, he says, his thumb pressing a little harder into my hand. He pauses, his eyes searching mine for something. Permission, a sign, anything. And then he adds the two words that completely undo me. And me, my world tilts on its axis. The tape measure clatters to the floor, forgotten. I don't say anything. I can't. I just stare at him, my mind racing, my body frozen. It's a joke, right? It has to be a joke. A flirty, masculine jest that I'm reading way too much into. He's just a friendly, straight contractor. He's going to laugh any second now, slap me on the back, and tell me to lighten up. But he doesn't laugh. His expression remains deadly serious. His eyes are full of a raw, naked vulnerability that I have never seen in him before. He's not playing. He's waiting. He's laid his cards on the table, and he's waiting for me to show him mine. The silence stretches on, thick and heavy. I can hear my own ragged breathing. I should say something. Anything. I should pull my hand away. I should make a joke, deflect, pretend I didn't hear him. But I can't. I'm paralyzed by a terrifying, exhilarating mix of fear and hope. He seems to take my silence as a rejection. A flicker of disappointment crosses his face. He starts to pull his hand away, a subtle, almost imperceptible retreat. No. The thought is a silent scream in my head. Before I can even process what I'm doing, my fingers are lacing through his, holding on tight. My own hand, which usually feels so clumsy and useless, suddenly feels strong and sure. His eyes widen in surprise. He looks down at our joined hands, then back up at me. A slow, tentative smile spreads across his face. It's not the secret, knowing smile from before. This one is different. It's open. It's relieved. It's beautiful. Okay. He breathes, the word a soft puff of air. Okay. I echo, my voice barely a whisper. He squeezes my hand once, a firm, reassuring pressure. Then he lets go and stands up, turning back to the wall as if nothing has happened. He picks up his pencil, marks the line on the drywall, his movements as steady and efficient as ever. But I can see the slight tremor in his hands. He's not as calm as he's pretending to be. I remain crouched on the floor for a long moment, my hand still tingling where he touched it. I feel dizzy, like I've just stepped off a roller coaster. My mind is a chaotic jumble of emotions. Shock, disbelief, a wild, soaring hope that feels dangerous and fragile. He works for another hour, and we don't speak of it. We don't even look at each other. The air is thick with unspoken words. The space between us is a live wire, humming with a new and terrifying energy. Every time he moves, every time he clears his throat, I flinch, expecting him to say something, to take it back, to shatter the delicate new reality we've created. When 5 o'clock comes, he starts to pack up his tools. The ritual is the same as always, but everything feels different. I watch him from the doorway of my office, my arms wrapped around my chest. He moves with his usual grace, but there's a new awareness in his movements. He knows I'm watching him. He finishes packing and turns to me. He walks over, stopping just a few feet away. "I'll see you tomorrow," he says, his voice even. "Okay," I say. He hesitates for a moment, as if he wants to say more. But he just gives me a small nod and walks towards the door. I watch him go, my heart sinking. Maybe I imagined it all. Maybe it was just a moment of weirdness, a slip of the tongue that he already regrets. He pauses at the front door, his hand on the knob. He turns back to look at me, his face silhouetted against the bright evening light. "Julian," he says, his voice so low I can barely hear him. "For the record, I'm not straight," and then he's gone. The door clicks shut behind him, and I'm left standing alone in the hallway, the scent of sawdust and coal lingering in the air. I bring my hand up to my face, the one he held. I can still feel the ghost of his touch, the warmth of his skin. "I'm not straight." The words echo in the silence of the house. A simple, declarative statement that changes everything. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. I spend the rest of the evening in a daze. I can't eat. I can't read. I can't think about anything but him. I wander through the house, touching the walls he has touched, running my fingers over the new, smooth plaster. The house feels different now. It's no longer just a collection of my grandmother's memories. It's becoming something new, something of my own. I barely sleep that night. I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in the hallway over and over again. The look in his eyes, the feel of his hand, his voice. "Hold this." And me, it was a plea, a request, an offering, and I had accepted. The next morning, I am a nervous wreck. What happens now? How do we act around each other? Do we talk about it? Do we pretend it never happened? I make the coffee with shaking hands, my stomach churning. He arrives at 8 o'clock, right on time. I hear his truck pull up, the familiar rumble a comforting and terrifying sound. I watch from the window as he gets out. He looks the same as always. Calm, confident, solid. He walks up the path, and my heart starts to pound. I open the door before he can knock. He looks surprised to see me there. "Morning," he says, his voice a little rough. "Morning," I reply. An awkward silence hangs between us. He looks at me, his eyes searching mine. I can see the uncertainty there, mirroring my own. He clears his throat. "I should get to work. I made coffee," I blurt out. He gives me a small, grateful smile. "Thanks." He follows me into the kitchen. The space feels impossibly small with him in it. I pour him a mug, my hand so unsteady that I slosh a little onto the counter. I curse under my breath and grab a cloth to wipe it up. He reaches out and puts his hand over mine, stilling my frantic movements. "Julian," he says softly. I look up at him. He's so close I can see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I can smell the faint scent of his soap. "I'm not good with words," he says, his voice low and earnest. "I never have been. I'm better with my hands. I build things. I fix things. That's what I know." He pauses, taking a breath. "What I said yesterday, I meant it. I don't know what this is, or where it's going, but I feel something for you. I have since the first day I came here." I stare at him, my mind reeling. Since the first day. He felt it too. I wasn't just a lonely, delusional man projecting his fantasies onto the hired help. It was real. It was mutual. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost brings me to my knees washes over me. Relief. Joy. A terrifying, exhilarating vulnerability. "Me too." I whisper, the words catching in my throat. I feel it too. A slow, beautiful smile spreads across his face, lighting up his eyes. He lifts his other hand and gently cups my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His touch is electric. "Good," he says, his voice thick with emotion. "That's good." He leans in slowly, giving me time to pull away. But I don't. I can't. I lean into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut. And then he kisses me. It's not a soft, hesitant kiss. It's firm and sure and hungry, like he's been waiting to do this for a lifetime. His lips are warm and slightly chapped, and he tastes of coffee and something uniquely, intoxicatingly cold. He pulls me closer, his arm wrapping around my waist, lifting me up onto my toes. I melt against him, my hands coming up to tangle in his short, soft hair. It's everything. It's the answer to a question I was too afraid to ask. It's the end of the loneliness, the silence. It's the beginning of something new and terrifying and wonderful. It feels like coming home. When we finally break apart, we're both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. I can feel the steady beat of his heart against my chest. Wow, he breathes. I let out a shaky laugh. Yeah. Wow, he opens his eyes and looks at me, his expression full of a warmth and tenderness that makes my heart ache. I should probably get to work, he says, a playful smirk on his lips. You probably should. I agree, my voice still shaky. He gives me one last, quick kiss, and then he picks up his coffee mug and heads upstairs, leaving me leaning against the counter, my legs feeling like jelly. I bring my fingers up to my lips. They're still tingling. The rest of the day passes in a dreamlike haze. The sounds of his work upstairs are a comforting, familiar backdrop to the chaotic symphony of emotions in my head. Every now and then, he'll come downstairs for a drink of water or to grab a tool, and our eyes will meet across the room. A silent, secret communication passes between us. A shared smile. A knowing glance. The house is no longer silent. It's filled with the hum of unspoken possibilities. That evening, when he's packing up, the awkwardness from the morning is gone, replaced by a comfortable, easy intimacy. So, I say, trying to sound casual as I lean against the doorframe. What now? He turns to me, a thoughtful look on his face. I finish this job, he says. I make sure your house is perfect. And then, I'd like to take you on a proper date. Somewhere that doesn't involve plaster dust, my heart soars. A date. A real date. I'd like that. I say, a genuine smile spreading across my face. I'd like that a lot, he smiles back, a real, full-blown smile that reaches his eyes and makes him look younger, more carefree. Good, he says. I'll see you tomorrow, Julian. See you tomorrow, Cole. The next morning, I woke up feeling a strange mix of euphoria and terror. The kiss had been real. His words had been real. But a part of me, the part that had been lonely for so long, was convinced it was all a fluke. A dream I would wake up from at any moment. I was terrified that he would walk in, and the magic would be gone. He would be distant, regretful. The professional barrier would be back up, higher and thicker than before. I heard his truck arrive, and my stomach twisted into a knot. I stayed in the kitchen, busying myself with the coffee, my back to the door. I heard his footsteps in the hall, the soft thud of his work boots on the old wood floors. He didn't say anything. The silence stretched, and my anxiety grew with each passing second. He regretted it. I knew it. It was too good to be true. Then I felt a warm presence behind me. Two large, strong hands settled on my waist, and a solid chest pressed against my back. Cole rested his chin on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. Morning, he murmured, his voice a low, sleepy rumble. The tension in my body dissolved in an instant, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated relief. I leaned back against him, my head tilting to the side to give him better access. Morning, I whispered back. He nuzzled my neck, his stubble pleasantly rough against my skin. Did you sleep well? Not really, I admitted. I was worried. He turned me around in his arms, his hands still resting on my waist. He looked down at me, his expression serious. Worried about what? That you would regret it, I said, my voice small. That this was a mistake. He shook his head, a soft, sad smile on his lips. Julian, he said, his voice full of a gentle reproach. The only thing I regret is not doing that sooner. I've wanted to kiss you since that first day. When you were standing on the porch looking so lost, my heart swelled. He saw me. He really saw me. Not just the quiet, awkward client, but the lonely man underneath. I wasn't lost, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. I was just waiting. He leaned in and kissed me again, a slow, deep kiss that was full of reassurance and promise. It was a morning after kiss, a kiss that said, this is real. We are real. The work on the house continued, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. We were no longer just a contractor and a client. We were something else, something new and undefined. We moved around each other with a new awareness, a new intimacy. There were stolen kisses in the hallway, lingering touches as we passed on the stairs, quiet moments where we would just stand and look at each other, a silent conversation passing between our eyes. He started staying later, long after the workday was officially over. We would sit on the porch, drinking beer as the sun went down, the air filled with the scent of freshly cut wood and blooming roses. He would tell me about his life, about growing up in a small town, about the series of dead-end jobs that led him to discover his passion for carpentry. He spoke of his work with a quiet pride, a satisfaction in creating something solid and lasting with his own two hands. I, in turn, found myself opening up to him in a way I never had with anyone before. I told him about my grandmother, about growing up in this house, about the suffocating loneliness I had felt since she was gone. I told him about my work, my dreams, my fears. He listened patiently, his steady presence a comforting anchor in the turbulent sea of my emotions. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch, he reached over and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "this house has good bones. It just needed someone to see the potential, to take care of it." He looked at me, his eyes full of a meaning that went far beyond the house. I knew he wasn't just talking about the roof and the walls. He was talking about me. The job was nearing its end. The last of the drywall was up, the walls were painted, the trim was installed. The house was transformed. It was bright and clean and solid. It felt like a home again. But with each finished task, a familiar anxiety began to creep back in. The reason for him being here was disappearing. Soon, there would be no more work to be done. He would pack up his tools for the last time, and he would leave. The thought was a cold knot of fear in my stomach. What if this, all of this, was just a product of our proximity? A workplace romance that would fizzle out once the job was over? He had talked about a date, but what if he changed his mind? What if the reality of a relationship with me, outside the bubble of this house, was too much for him? On the final day, I watched him as he did his final sweep, cleaning up the last of the dust, packing his tools into his truck. Each movement was a small, painful reminder that this was it. It was over. He came back inside, his face clean, his work clothes exchanged for a fresh t-shirt and jeans. He looked handsome and relaxed, and my heart ached. "Well," he said, looking around the newly renovated hallway. "That's it. She's all yours. It looks amazing, Cole," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I can't thank you enough. It was my pleasure," he said, his eyes meeting mine. An awkward silence fell between us. This was the moment. He would ask for the final payment, and then he would go. I reached for my checkbook, my hands trembling. "I just need to write you a check, Julian," he said, his voice cutting me off. He stepped closer, taking the checkbook from my hands and setting it on the table. He took my hands in his grip warm and firm. "The house is done," he said, his voice low and serious. "But I don't think we are." He looked at me, his eyes full of a sincerity that took my breath away. "I know I said I'd take you on a date when this was over," he continued. "But I don't want to wait. I want to start now. With you." Here, he lifted one of my hands and pressed a small, cold object into my palm. I looked down. It was a key. A brand new, shiny key. "I made a copy of the new front door key," he said, a sheepish smile on his face. "Just in case. I mean, you can say no. You can throw it away. But I was hoping you'd let me use it." I stared at the key in my palm, my vision blurring with tears. It was such a simple, profound gesture. A key. An invitation. A promise. It was everything I had been too afraid to hope for. I looked up at him, a tear tracing a path down my cheek. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a choked sob escaping my lips. He smiled, a beautiful, radiant smile of pure relief. He wiped away my tear with his thumb, his touch as gentle as ever. "So," he said, his voice a little shaky, "what do you say we order a pizza, crack open a couple of beers, and I can start telling you all the other things I want to fix around here?" I let out a wet, happy laugh. "I think," I said, my voice full of a joy so pure it felt like it could lift me off the ground. "I think I'd like that very much." Later that night, we were curled up on my old, comfortable sofa, an empty pizza box on the coffee table. A cheesy action movie was playing on the TV, but neither of us was watching. I was lying with my head in his lap, his fingers gently stroking my hair. The house was quiet, but it was a comfortable, peaceful silence. It was the silence of two people who were content to just be together. I looked around the room, at the freshly painted walls, the warm glow of the lamp, the solid, comforting presence of the man I was falling in love with. The ghosts were gone. The loneliness had receded, replaced by a feeling of warmth and safety I had never known before. Cole looked down at me, a soft, questioning look in his eyes. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I smiled, reaching up to touch his face, the rough texture of his stubble a familiar, welcome sensation. "I'm thinking," I said, my voice full of a quiet certainty, "that I'm finally home." He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, sweet kiss that was full of all the words we didn't need to say. It was a kiss that sealed a promise, a kiss that marked the end of a long, quiet wait and the beginning of a brand new life. The house was no longer just a house. It was our home, and for the first time in a very long time, I was looking forward to the future, to all the days and years we would spend within its newly repaired walls, building something solid and lasting, together.